Okay, so we're going to get started. For anybody who does join late, there is going to, and for everyone who's online now, there will be a recording that is shared with everyone at the end. So you will have access to all the slides and all of our discussions, as well as contact information to explore further with both Quality Smart Solutions and SR&ED Unlimited. So let's get started and welcome. Today, are going to be covering how to turn innovation into tax credits using the SR&ED cover program. So today, joining me is Dave, who is the kind of head and dedicated partner of SR&ED Unlimited. He's got 18 years of experience behind this program and has been building strong relationships with customers and government agencies for that entire time. So myself, I'm a regulatory advisor with QSS. I work with companies through the FDA and Health Canada licensing. I have a specialty in more of the cannabis and psychedelics and controlled substances areas, but my job also touches MDL, DELs, auditing, all the joyous things that you don't actually want to do, but you have to do to be compliant. So at this point, I'm going to hand the initial part of this discussion over to Dave to go through what SR&ED really means for you and your organization.
Okay, thank you very much, Marie. I want to start, and I'm sure there's still a few people joining. A few people said they would be late. Want to ask a question of the audience. You can type just an N or a no into the comments section if you want to participate. If you have never heard of the program or don't think that you qualify, if you can just put an N in the comments section, just so we can get a few reactions there. And I find most people don't know much about the program. So if that's you, just let us know. We'll just give that a second in case people want to comment. If that's the case, I see a few people already responding. Thank you very much. You're in the right place. I just want to reassure you, this is the webinar for you. I often joke with my clients that the hardest part of my job is explaining my job. It can be pretty complex and overwhelming dealing with the CRA, which is why using a specialist like QSS or SR&ED Unlimited can be so helpful. The main message I want to leave you with is companies often qualify even when they don't think they do. That's sort of one of the top two answers I get when I talk to people about SR&ED. So today we'll start with a quick overview and then move to some specific examples so you can understand how the program works. My goal is really simple: help you access more government funds. In fact, that's one of the best parts of my job is I get to bring people extra money. So typically people are happy to see me. That's always a good feeling. So let's get started. What is SR&ED? So SR&ED stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development. It's a bit of a mouthful, so most of us shorten it to SR&ED or SR&ED. It's the largest innovation funding program for Canadian companies and has been for several decades. It's important to note that there's no budget for this program. So you're not competing against other applicants like you do with a grant, where your application has to be better than theirs. If your projects are eligible, you're entitled to the refund. This is part of why I encourage everyone who's eligible to apply, because those are your funds sitting on the table waiting for you. The government wants you to have this money. The program is designed to promote innovation in Canadian companies and offset the costs of advancing technology. What most people don't realize, though, is that it's not an R&D program in the traditional sense. The key language used to describe it is knowledge gain. Actually, if we can go back one slide. Yeah. So what's the difference? The difference is that the program rewards you for advancing your internal company knowledge. The goal is that you will get better at what you do, more efficient, more competitive, even if you fail. I like to joke that the CRA loves it when you fail. And if you do fail for technological reasons, your SR&ED claim is even stronger. What that means is the program is not limited only to technology companies or research labs. Any company trying to solve production problems, improve their efficiency, develop or improve their products or processes, all of those might be eligible, because eligibility is based on the obstacles you face and the knowledge you gain while trying to overcome them. So next slide, please. So SR&ED benefits. Let's jump quickly to the benefits of the program. First and foremost, it is a refundable tax credit. This means that credits earned through the program are first applied to any taxes the company owes. Anything left over is cash to the business. So this can be very, very helpful, not just to offset your tax obligations, especially in highly taxed or heavily taxed industries like cannabis, but it also can fund your business outside of the taxes owing. On top of the federal credits, most provinces add an additional amount. It varies slightly across the country. One of the primary benefits is that you can use those funds however you want. So unlike a grant, which you apply for and you have to get approved ahead of time, and then you use the money for that specific purpose, SR&ED credits and refunds have no restrictions. Also, unlike a grant, it's the only retroactive program of its kind, meaning you've already done the work, you've already spent the money. So the credits are meant to offset that expense, that risk. The main takeaway here is that you get refunded for money you've already spent and work you've already done, and you can use that refund however you choose. So what qualifies and who? The good news is that almost any Canadian company doing eligible work can qualify, regardless of sector. What qualifies gets a bit more complex. There are two primary components for eligibility. That's eligible expenses and eligible work. I'll start with the expenses because it's easier. There's a slide up for your reference. There's three main categories that you can expense, that you can claim. The first, of course, is T4 wage. So anytime you or your employees have spent, that's the primary expense that we look for. 60% of the claim time is refundable. Ingredients or materials, if you have to build a prototype or several iterations of a prototype, or you're testing a batch and have to throw it out and you lose that batch for R&D purposes, that's claimable. And then third-party contractors or consultants, anyone who has specialized expertise you don't have in-house, their invoice costs are refundable. And you can see it's 60, 40, 30. It's a fairly straightforward calculation, and it varies slightly across the country. Eligible work is a bit more complicated. So it involves encountering a problem where it's uncertain how to achieve your goal. This means there's no standard approach, path forward, or public knowledge about how to overcome the problem. You hit a wall and you need to do research or experimentation to overcome the obstacle. So every few years, the CRA kind of refines their explanation of SR&ED. And right now we're in the why and how. This is what they use to explain it. As you can see from the slide, the why is the first thing. Why did you have to do SR&ED? Why was this not routine engineering? So you can see some of the questions there. You need to ask yourself that all important question that I mentioned. As an expert at what you do, now what do I do? You hit that obstacle. The how talks about your methodology. So it has to be a systematic investigation. You have to do a set of trials. You have to observe the results. You have to make some observations and analysis. I like to explain it like this. As an expert at what you do, you're expected to be able to solve most routine problems that you encounter. Things like achieving a certain flavor, efficacy, or ingredient ratio. The SR&ED starts when you hit a wall and you have to ask yourself, now what do I do? Here's an example. Let me use an example. Because technological obstacles, this part that I'm talking about right now, this is one of the key components to a successful claim, and it's notoriously difficult to explain. The CRA probably purposely is somewhat vague about it and always has been. So here's the example. You want to develop a gluten-free pizza with a very spicy cheese topping. You research a gluten-free dough recipe online. Maybe you make a few iterations. You find the one that you like the best. You create 7 different blends of cheese toppings. And your tasting panel tests everything and confirms that dough recipe 3 and cheese blend 5 is the best combination. That's not SR&ED. That's routine product development. You're expected to be able to do that if you're in the area of making pizza or doing food. There was no technological obstacle to overcome. There's no possibility of failure. There's no uncertainty about how to find the right cheesy topping. Put another way, it was a subjective decision without any barriers or obstacles. You know how to blend cheese toppings. It's just a matter of continuing that routine process to find the one you like. Okay, just to put another point on it, you had to ask what topping is best, not how do we do this. Finding best or optimal solutions are typically not shred because it suggests you already know how to find the answer, even if you don't know what the answer is. This is probably one of the biggest mistakes people make when they're writing their own shred claims. I see this often, even when they're taking notes for themselves. We wanted to find the optimal X, Y, or Z. It can be shred, but usually it's not because it suggests you know how to get to that answer. So to make it shred, let's take that same example, gluten-free pizza with a spicy cheesy topping. You have your cheesy topping that you want. You have your dough recipe formula. When you slice the pizza, without the gluten, it doesn't have enough structural integrity to support the topping blend you want to use. The slice falls apart as you pick it up. So now what do you do? That's where the shred starts. You have a technological obstacle, making the slice strong enough to support your desired topping without adding gluten or compromising flavor. You have multiple paths you can take, different ways you could try to solve this, but you don't know what, if anything, is going to work. You don't know how to find your answer without conducting some experiments. You can go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So I'm not going to get into this. This is pretty straightforward. If you've taken grade 8 science class, you've seen this is the grade 8 lab report format. The more you can structure a project, sorry, just go back a step. The more you can structure a project like that grade 8 lab report, the better. We're, after all, we're looking for a scientific or technological challenge and approach. This is an overview. But your shred project should try to follow this as much as possible. And we will be handing this out afterwards, so you don't have to worry about copying everything down. You'll get this in all the other slides as well. Last point about eligible projects. It's not enough to say what worked. You need to demonstrate that you spent time understanding why it worked or didn't. You gained knowledge because, as I said before, this is a program about closing your knowledge gap, right? So you're trying to learn something. Even if you failed at it, you learned that path doesn't work for you. That's still knowledge gained. Okay, let me step back for a second. We've sort of given one example of a project. There's other projects that can qualify. It's not only about developing new products. You can also be improving a product. So let's say you have a popular food item and want to make it vegan or gluten-free. Perhaps you want to make it high fiber or low fat. If there's no known way to do that, or the available methods don't meet your goals or constraints, that could be an SR&ED project. It's also not just products that qualify, processes can be eligible. For example, say your existing production line is designed to produce 500 units an hour and your demand increases. Now you need to produce 700 per hour. New line equipment might be outside your budget. So how do you modify your technology to go faster without compromising quality? Can you even adapt it beyond its existing capabilities? Perhaps your production lines can produce 400 ml bottles. And you want to produce a 250 ml version. Maybe you've got an 8 to 10% rejection rate during your QA process, and you want to reduce that to 3%. All of these are potential projects because you must understand what's preventing you from achieving your goal, and then do some testing and work on how you're going to meet your objective. These are not definitive shred examples. I just want to make that clear. This is not like guaranteed this is a shred project, but they're good starting points that we'll ask questions if we work together to sort of find these kinds of problems and then delve into them to see if they're shred. Lastly, This is also important. It doesn't have to be a product or process. Scientific research alone can also qualify. So the SR part of SR&ED is scientific research. So that can be basic research or applied research. Both are eligible for the program. And just to clarify, basic research is research just to advance knowledge. There's no specific use in mind. It's just we're going to learn something here. Applied research is we want to do some scientific studies to advance an application that we have. We want to get better at something or apply it in some way. All right, sorry, back up a slide if you don't mind. Who qualifies? As you can see from this slide and from what we've talked about, the SR&ED program can work for many different industries. Formally, the program is industry agnostic. So when people ask me if they qualify, we point them to the high-level criteria here. Canadian company, so paying taxes in Canada, preferably incorporated. You can be sole proprietor partnership. It's a different threshold. You have a production environment. So even a software engineer, you're producing something. And then you've got eligible projects and eligible expenses like we just talked about. In those slides above. That's the starting point. So it's not so much about who's restricted from the program, but whether your work qualifies. If you meet the above 4 criteria, you probably do. You're probably eligible. Excuse me. One of the primary facets of my job as a consultant is to help you find those eligible projects and expenses, and then to translate the work you're doing into the structure and language the CRA requires. That's kind of a big part of it. What can be frustrating to people is that it's hard to define the program parameters, especially to determine if you qualify, because each application is evaluated on that company's baseline knowledge. Where you are starting from is key to determining if your projects are eligible. One of the things I see often is that different companies will attempt to solve similar problems in very different ways. That's because each company has its own unique level of technology, knowledge, and skill they can bring to bear. So the program rewards you for the work you do. Okay, if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go into the details here. There's quite a lot on this slide and the next, and you'll have a copy of this afterwards. This is sort of an example that we've created with some of the questions we would ask in an interview to help elicit whether there's SR&ED there or not, and sort of get into the details. I just want to mention sort of questions 1 and 2 speak to the why component. Why did you need to do SR&ED versus routine engineering? So what was your objective or obstacle? And then what prevented you from achieving that? That's really a key question to ask. Why couldn't we just keep doing what we already know how to do until we found our answer? Questions 3 through 5 are about the methodology you use. How did you go about trying to solve your question or learn something more? How did you measure it? Were you closer or further? And then the last question, number 6, this is another really key component that a lot of people don't understand about SR&ED. What did you learn from the process? Your advancements are part of SR&ED. If you don't have any advancements, you don't have SR&ED, even if you filled out everything else. So in this case, if you just jump to the bottom of section 6, they learned something, and that led to 2 new theories that evolved from it. So in this case, you made the advancements, you have the 2 new theories. Each of those theories would now start at number 1 and have their own track to pursue. And so now that's how you can see how a SR&ED project can grow. It's not just one set of tests, it's usually multiple sets of tests all linked together. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground. I know that this can get a little bit overwhelming, and there's a lot of things we can get into in terms of details. I want to save as much time for questions and answers. I find that usually is the best use of time. But the primary message I want to convey is that more people qualify than they realize. The program can sound confusing, it can seem a little intimidating, but it's worth exploring, because this is one of the largest funding options, government funding options in Canada to support innovation and technology advancement. We always encourage everyone to have a quick chat with an experienced consultant, because this money is available for anyone who qualifies. And I just want to say one more thing about that. There's no budget for this program. It doesn't run out of money. Anyone who's eligible is eligible for that money for whatever they're claiming. So the government really wants you to take advantage of these funds. It's worth a 15-minute call to find out if you qualify. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And now I'm going to throw some nice hard questions at you during our fireside chat, and I'm sure you're going to do the same to me. We're going to talk a little bit, just so everybody knows, about how consultants who work in the realm of kind of quality assurance and licensing, similar to Quality Smart Solutions, and organizations like Dave's join together, where we touch to kind of support your shred, and shred supports your future development work. Just so everyone knows, I do see the questions popping up in the chat. We are going to address those during our Q&A, which is just after the fireside chat. So don't worry. I do see we've had about 5 questions pop in there, and we are going to address those today. So let's start with question number 1. So I see a lot of innovation in breeding and cultivation, just to touch on our cultivation cannabis company example that you just provided. Okay. So whether it's developing new cannabis strains for specific cannabinoid profiles, which we're seeing more demand for on the market, or just enhancing crops' nutritional value. So maybe it's not even a cannabis product per se, but someone's doing a NHP ingredient on their farm and is looking to kind of enhance bioavailability and that type of thing. So what distinguishes a shred-eligible biological research from routine agricultural practices and kind of development?
Right. That's a good question. That really speaks to the heart of the program, and it's where a lot of people get stuck. So if you're taking a shotgun approach to pheno hunting, for example, where you're planting 12 different cultivars and breeding them to try and see which one has the best characteristic, the highest THC, the highest yield, whatever it is, that's not shred. That's trial and error. And trial and error is explicitly not SR&ED. The reason is, going back to that example, you're trying a bunch of things to see what happens. To make it shred, you have to have a specific objective in mind. So let's say you've done some pheno hunting and you've identified some cultivars with specific characteristics, and you like those characteristics. You know how to keep breeding them to try and enhance those characteristics. How do you go beyond that? Let's say, for example, you find a cultivar that you want to use that's got, I'm just going to keep it simple with one, THC. THC is 22%. You want to get to 25%. Your breeding program has allowed you to accomplish 22. That's your baseline knowledge. How do you get it to 25? That's where there could be shred. So one way to approach that in a shred project is, how do we increase that, get that 3%? That's our gap. Do we feed it more light? Can we starve it of water? Can we increase temperature or humidity? How do those variables affect that characteristic we're looking for? So if you can look that information up, then that's not shred. That's available information. But cannabis is still very new, so there's not a lot of that information out there and available. The work you do to develop your recipes and formulas and correlation of variables, that's shred. And just very quickly, another way you can turn that into shred is the process itself. Pheno hunting is very time consuming and very costly. Everyone's trying to do it. So how do you do it faster or better or more efficiently? That could be a shred project. So instead of taking 16 weeks to do your pheno hunting, can you get it down to 12? That might be a shred project if you have some theories or ideas on how to improve it so you can get your results faster.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so to lead off of that, so many of our clients are conducting clinical trials or preclinical research, and they're doing the early stages of that experimental work. Can you clarify which stages of product development typically qualify for shred? And is it only early discovery stages, or can later stage research also be eligible?
Okay, that's a great question. The simple answer is the stage is irrelevant to shred. It's the obstacle you're facing at that stage. So you may have a shred problem very early on that once it's resolved, your commercialization aspect or the following stages aren't shred. You may have a shred problem that permeates the entire process. So it really can it can happen at any stage. It can happen through multiple stages. It always comes down to what is the obstacle you faced in trying to achieve your objective, and how did you go about trying to solve it. Um, we talked about this a little bit offline previously. When you're planning for regulatory work, you don't always know the obstacles that are going to come up. But one of the questions I would ask you is, how would you recommend to a client to prepare for the regulatory compliance, and how do you see that fitting in for shred?
Okay, so that's a bit of a loaded question too. Uh, Really, it comes down to basically what you're saying. It's asking yourself a question. What is your goal?
Mhm,
So if your goal is to produce a natural health product, you know you're going to be needing a natural health site license. You're going to need MPN numbers, um, and you're going to have a proper plan in place, records in place, documentation um, to prove that you meet those requirements, that you are able to produce a safe product for Canadians, as we know that,
mhm,
that's Health Canada's number one preference when it comes to this. Um, and we also know under GMP, if it's not written down, it didn't happen, and it doesn't matter if you did it, it didn't happen. And you can't tell anybody otherwise when it comes to the regulators. So it's coming up with a plan, having a proper documentation in place, and addressing your concerns throughout that process while meeting those regulatory concerns. And that's really where a team like ours, or any consultant that specializes in regulatory guidance, can step in and help new companies or existing companies who are kind of foraying into a new world. So say you've been in natural health products and you're moving into maybe more of a pharmaceutical or a medical device, even you're expanding your operations. How is it that you are tracking and preparing for that? And how are you proving to Health Canada or under SR&ED, the CRA, that you've done those things and that you've taken those proper steps?
mhm. Okay. So the documentation part that you talked about, I know you had asked me this as well, and documentation is key. I would probably add in something that it's worthwhile to have good documentation procedures up front. It is the difference between regulatory documentation and shred documentation. I can get into it more later. I'm sure people will have questions about that, but um, it's the same premise of, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. And if you have a good plan for the documentation, that's always good. A lot of people struggle with that because it's tedious work. Um, and we've worked on that. We've developed some templates to try and make it easier. Do you have something similar? How easy do you make it for your
We try
clients?
and make it as easy as possible for our customers.
Hmm.
Again, it comes down to what project they are working on and what question they're asking themselves. We do have some templated. We can even help people create their own SOPs and that type of thing. It is one area that I find people get really scared of, is an SOP, and really it's just a how-to.
Yeah.
But really, what it comes down to is our specialization is all the things nobody wants to do, which is write
Hmm.
things down and track them,
Right.
and you know, the things that a lot of people think are holding up progress
Yeah.
are the things that you need to make the government happy to give you money or even a
Yeah.
license. So, yeah, that's really where we try and fill in the gaps and support our customers, is help provide them with roadmaps. So,
Hmm.
say you're working on an NHP site license application or a new NHP product. When you onboard, we send you a giant checklist of, these are the things that you are going to need. We work on your timeline. A lot of customers, are looking really long term. They want to bring somebody in early so that they have that support, hand holding throughout that process, make sure they don't miss anything. Others are, nope, I got this, and just I need somebody to review things at the very end and make sure I haven't missed anything. and we're there to help with that as
Mhm.
well. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. So another question for you that I had. Okay, so companies that are developing novel delivery systems, so something
Mhm.
like nanoemulsions, we know this is growing across
Mhm.
multiple industries, encapsulation technologies, increased bioavailability, or new extraction methods even for any beneficial compounds. What kind of documentation is the CRA looking for to demonstrate that technological advancement?
Okay. Uh, yeah. So
And I got
documentation
to
is
follow
probably,
up to that too.
yeah, yeah. We were just talking about it, so that's a good follow up question. Um, Documentation is probably one of the questions I get asked about the most when I'm talking with someone who would like to use the program because it's intimidating. And the so I'll give you two answers. I'll give you the CRA answer and I'll give you my answer. The CRA wants to see as much documentation as possible. Like you said, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. So they want to see, you know, work when you did the work, you took notes. So you were tracking it at the time with dates and times of people involved. How much time did everyone spend? They want to get an idea of what problem you were trying to solve, what variables you were exploring, which your results and observations were. The more detailed you can do it, and the more in that grade 8 lab report format, the better. So that's what they want. I should also point out that in 18 years of doing this, I have only seen a couple of times where the CRA was satisfied with the documentation. It's a moving target. It's very hard to hit it. So my answer is slightly different. When you're doing your documentation, again, we help with this. You have to recognize that the people looking at it from the shred perspective are not necessarily experts in your field. They're scientists and engineers, but they may not know details of what you do or how you're doing your work. So if your documentation can tell the story, tell your story of shred, tell the story of your development, that's really effective. And we help you. We give you some guidance on doing that. They want to see that you went from point A to point B to point C. How did you get from each point? How did that story evolve? And I tell people, especially when there's a review, if you can be the teacher, if you can explain it to them as if you're teaching an introductory class on your business, that helps a lot because the more they can understand what you've done, the more likely you are to get approved. So that's probably a little different than the regulatory. um, I'm not sure how different that is, but I find that in shred it needs to just be easy to understand. Someone needs to be able to follow along and understand what you did along the way.
Yeah, one thing that I've noticed with some of my customers is they almost give too much information, which
Mhm.
then leads somebody to ask more questions that are not actually relevant to that
Right,
application or to that
right.
approval that they are seeking through whichever regulatory body it is that they're
Mhm.
working with. Um, so what records should companies be maintaining during this experimental work?
Okay. Uh, Honestly, the first thing we do is we ask what kind of records the company already has, because the easiest is to use what you're already doing. Um, One of the reasons the CRA does not mandate specific types of documentation is because they're not allowed to. By law, they're not allowed to. And the courts have upheld this again and again. Every company has different resources, different systems, different ways of tracking things. Some people might want it in an Excel spreadsheet. Some people may take a lab notebooks and take notes. So they're not allowed to say it has to be this. So the first thing we do is, how do you normally do it? And then we've developed a series of templates that documentation is administrative work. So the goal is that you can choose any of the templates. You take 5 minutes a week per project, fill out the details for the sheet, whichever one you want to use, and then you've got your documentation. Again, you're not going to hit every single note that they want, but as long as you're doing it regularly, even if it's weekly or bi-weekly, whatever it is, you're showing that you're doing it along the way and you're tracking it. So that's what's key, is that you're not making it up after the fact, you're doing it along the way
Okay, perfect. So be proactive as opposed to reactive to your
as
projects
much as
and your
possible. And
documentation.
I should clarify that when we start working with clients, probably 90% plus are worried about their documentation and don't have sufficient documentation.
Okay.
So it's not, we don't need that documentation to submit the claim, but if there's a review, we do need to have it. So we do some training about that when we onboard new
Excellent.
clients.
I like it. So good documentation practices. Good.
They're helpful. They're not
They're
essential,
helpful,
but very helpful.
but very helpful.
Yeah.
And how that ties in with kind of the regulatory applications and all that fun stuff
Yes.
is, yes, you need to have master files, you need to have proper documentation. If you're ever audited, little things will set off regulators. Do not backdate things. Make sure they are properly signed and
Right.
that you are not making things up along the way.
Right.
Because they may not know everything about what you're doing, but they're going to know enough when you're trying to pull the wool over their eyes. And they really get mad about that. Okay, so I think that kind of covers that region, unless you had any more questions kind of on the regulatory side posed to that.
I just we had talked before, and one of the reasons we've decided to work together is because there's a lot of mutually beneficial elements to what we do.
Yes,
If you're doing documentation for any kind of regulatory compliance, it probably is also going to be useful for SR&ED and vice versa. So
one can
if you are
populate the
looking at
other.
either one program, it's probably worthwhile to look at both, and you might end up getting the credits back, and it'll certainly improve your chances of getting regulatory compliance. So
Yeah, and
I think
absolutely. If
that's
you're,
a key message.
uh, yeah, and I was going to say, and as well, working with consultants who maybe are specialized in an area that you're
Mhm.
not, does quite often fall under SR&ED. Not always, but
Right.
often.
Mhm.
So again, having the two kind of work synergetically together for your
Yes.
organization does come to a benefit financially at the end of the year as well.
Mhm.
Because maybe you get more credits than you've paid your consultant, and now you can give somebody a raise or buy a new piece of equipment, or just have that to continue to build your business.
So let me just tell a quick story then.
Yeah,
I work with a lot of breweries. That's one of the industries that I specialize in, and food and beverage. And so every few years we go. I take some of my colleagues and we go do some brewery tours, a groups. In an area, and we visit them, and I try to interview them every year, and I ask them different things. One of the things I always ask is, what do you do with your SR&ED credits? And every time it always surprises me because everyone uses them differently, uses the money differently. Some, like you said, they can hire more people or give a raise. Some invest in new equipment. Some do more marketing, or they try to, they always wanted to do this particular style of beer, and it requires some equipment that they couldn't afford. So that's one of the benefits of the SR&ED program is the money's yours. You can use it however you like.
yeah, which is awesome because most government programs aren't like that.
Yes.
They're going to tell you. Okay, so one last question before we move into our Q&A, because we have had some really great questions pop up in the chat here.
Okay.
So our clients often need to conduct testing to meet Health Canada requirements,
Right.
stability testing, safety testing, quality control requirements. So how do you distinguish between what types of testing that's required for regulatory compliance and what is experimental research that qualifies for SR&ED?
Okay. Uh, it's a bit of a nuanced answer. So on
Okay.
the surface, testing for regulatory compliance is not SR&ED. That's routine. That is part of what you need to do. However, it can be SR&ED. So one example might be you've got a skin cream that's a very vibrant green, and that's part of the selling feature that you have for it. And Health Canada requirements are that you have to have a couple of ingredients, let's say zinc and oatmeal, so that you can claim health benefits for that skin cream. When you add the oatmeal and zinc, it turns into a dull gray, right? There's a it discolors, the texture is ruined. Now what do you do? So there's the requirements are to have those ingredients, but when you include those ingredients, it changes the characteristics you're looking for. That could launch a SR&ED project. So if you don't care about the green coloring and you're just meeting the requirements at certain levels, that's not SR&ED. That's just part of your business operations, if you will. There was something at the end that you said as well about the difference between experimental. So that's one aspect. Uh, the other aspect is you could be developing a new product or a new process, and it requires a certain testing. It has to meet certain targets for regulatory compliance. If your goals for the product are not meeting that requirement, the testing you do could be eligible again. So we have this new formulation that we think is going to be even better, but we must meet these requirements, and we're not. We're hitting this target, but not that. So that could be shred. I know I'm being a little bit vague because it's sort of so case by case. It really it's
That's okay.
beneficial to talk one-on-one and sort of explore what do you already know how to do, what's your requirement, and where are you struggling to meet that requirement.
Okay. And now, just before we move into our Q&A, I've got a personal question for you.
Okay.
So let's say someone wants to make a new health claim on a product that's already monographed with Health Canada. So say it's a magnesium product and they want to make a new claim about magnesium.
Right.
Would the research that they do to prove that new claim be considered shred?
Ooh, okay. The short answer is I don't know.
That
Off
is fair.
off the top of my head, I don't know, because again we have to get into the details of what information is already available to you. So if
Okay.
there is published information about the effects of magnesium, and you're basically leveraging that information into your project, that wouldn't be shred. You know, you may need to do some tweaking to get it to work just right, but the information is available, so you have access to it. The language that the CRA uses is a competent professional would not be able to resolve this issue.
Okay.
So if you have a magnesium expert and you can hire them and or publish information, you can use that. So if you are saying, well, the published information gets us to here, we actually want to go beyond it, that could be shred.
Okay. So now we are going to open the floor for questions from our audience. Let me take a look. Okay. So thank you. Our lovely Alexandra in the background is going to pop up some questions. Okay. So from Argan, so does this mean it more applies to troubleshooting and critical thinking related to research and not your normal product development process?
Okay. So yeah, again, that's an interesting
Starting with
question.
loaded questions for you.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Okay, so troubleshooting is explicitly not shred. So if, let's say, you're going through your production development process and you find that there was a faulty vent in your equipment somewhere and that ruined the project, and you sort of backtrack, you do all the troubleshooting, what worked, what didn't. Oh, here's the problem. And then you resolve that issue, you fix that problem, and now it works. That's what the CRA calls troubleshooting. You fixed a problem. It wasn't supposed to be like that. Once you got it working properly, the rest of it worked. That's not shred. If you've done your troubleshooting, that's your due diligence. That's your starting point. We've eliminated that there's no user error. It wasn't a production error. It wasn't an equipment failure, and it's still not working. Now you're asking yourself, now what do I do? That's where the shred would start. So the critical thinking is a key component, but the troubleshooting would not be.
Okay.
So hopefully that answers your question, but please feel free to ask again.
Yeah. And I am going to reiterate at this point that as well, contact information is going to be available at the end of this session, and we will make sure we direct any questions shred related to Dave,
Right.
and he will reach out to you one-on-one. Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah, sorry, just quickly,
yeah, do you want to
Alexander,
touch on the
move to
slide here?
that slide. This is just a visual representation of what we've talked about. Some people like visual a little bit better. So this is a flow chart you can take a look through. One of our specialists on staff created this because this is how she understands shred. It made sense to her. So feel free to look at that as well.
And let's take a look. So from Elizabeth, does this only apply to production environments?
Usually. So you do have to have a production environment. Let me give you an example of one that doesn't. So you're developing software. So you might be a service company and you're developing a software. Software IT solutions can be shred. That's a whole area of expertise. Our technical director is actually a specialist in that area. That's not my area of expertise. So if you need to develop something, let's say you've hired some software developers, or you're hiring you're contracting to a third party, there could be shred there. Even though your industry, you might be a service industry, that could be a shred project. Production environment is typically one of the criteria, though, because it has to be related to a production problem of some sort, a development problem, and that's, of course, outside of scientific research. So that has nothing to do with production, other than maybe producing knowledge.
Okay. All right. And I please do not hold it to me if I say anyone's name incorrectly. I am going to try very, very deeply. But Anoop, how can we differentiate routine engineering work from shred eligible experimental activities?
Okay, that's the $1,000,000 question. That's really why a consultant can help, and where the line is with the CRA is difficult to find. Now, I will say this: the courts have often found in favor of the claimant over the CRA. Not always. That's not a 100%. But the courts have recognized this is a program designed to uh, support Canadian companies. So they want to give very large and free interpretations of the program. The CRA can be very strict, very narrow in their view, and the courts keep reminding them, no, we need to be a little bit open. Routine engineering versus shred is really where a lot of the problems or the difficulties lie. What's routine versus what's shred? I'll go back to the example. Routine engineering is a competent professional can use existing knowledge to find the answer. They may not know what the answer is, but they can find the answer. For it to be shred, you have to not know how to find the answer. You can't be sure that if I get the right mathematical formula or I get the right variables, then I'll know my answer. Maybe it's something else that you don't even know about. Maybe there's a variable in there that you hadn't considered. So again, it comes back to asking yourself, how am I going to do this? Not what is my best option or what is the answer, but how do I find that answer?
Okay.
And again, I can talk more one-on-one with people because it helps when you bring up your specific situations, and then we can delve into where your baseline knowledge is versus what's unknown.
Yeah. And don't worry, everybody, we're not expecting anybody to hand over any
Yeah,
proprietary
yeah,
information
yeah,
during
yeah,
this
yeah, yeah,
chat. We will introduce you guys so that you can have private conversations,
yeah.
please. So just to recap that, it's the house, the theorize, the testing, the analyzing, and the demonstrating is
Yes.
really where that comes through. Okay, so our next question for today is from Christopher. And what is the average expected cost to employ a company to file shred credits?
Great question. Okay, so there's two parts to that answer. I know I'm saying that a lot. Um, Most companies charge between, let's say, 15 and 35%. So some of the bigger companies will charge at the higher end. I've seen 30, 35. I'd say the average is closer to about 20 right now. 20, and so it's a performance basis. I should say that up front, meaning you only get invoiced when you get your refund. If there's no refund, there's no invoice. There's a couple of companies now that have done a flat fee. You pay a flat fee up front, regardless of what you get, but that's a very, very tiny percentage. So 15 to 25 is probably the range for most claims. And some of the bigger companies will charge more. So the second part to that is that's for claims up to a few $100,000. So if you're getting a $500,000 refund or $1,000,000 refund, typically you'll be in a different bracket. So you'll get a much lower rate, 10, 12%, whatever you negotiate with your consultant. Usually when there's that much shred on the table, you can get a discount. So
That is
it,
fair.
it depends on a few different factors, but if in the typical, it's 15 to 25, I would say. One last really important point: when you start getting lower, aside from those high value claims, the $1,000,000 claims, when you're getting to 15%, be careful. A lot of consultants will have you do the work. So they will ask you to write your draft reports and send them the information, and then they just edit it and fix it up. And that's why they charge you less. So one of the things we offer and you should look for if you're looking for a consultant is We do all that work. We prepare all the reports. We prepare all the technical reports, the cost reports. We put all of that together. We prepare the claim for you and then review it with you for accuracy. So you don't submit anything you're not comfortable with, but you don't have to have your people spending time on it. That's a really key thing. So if you're getting to a low percentage, make sure that you're not doing the work yourself.
Okay. So is it fair to go back to that old adage of fast, cheap, and good, and you can only have two of those?
Yes, I like that one. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, me too. It's very true. All right, so we've got a few minutes left here. So Aprahita, please tell me I said that right. Does this also apply to any training and certification investments done by a company? And is it restricted to only a company that produces a physical product, or does it also apply to consulting firms and training centers?
Okay, so off the top, no, consulting firms, training centers would not qualify. It's not really meant for that. So training and certification investments in my company, no, not really, because what's your obstacle, right? They don't know how to do X. We're going to train them, and now they will. So you have a path to your answer to your solution. And again, that doesn't exclude you from SR&ED entirely, because let's say you're a training center and you're developing virtual reality training. So that's a whole new system. There's a whole production involved with that. And again, it's not guaranteed to be SR&ED, but there could be SR&ED there. This is still new technology. You're adapting it. Does it meet your needs? How do you get it to go beyond what its, the original capabilities? How do you push the limits? There could be SR&ED from that part of things.
Okay. So again, solving a problem as opposed to,
right.
Or yeah, asking a question that you don't know the answer to.
When I start working with a client, especially if they're new to SR&ED, the high level question I ask is, think back over the last year. Where did you spend time or money solving a problem? That's really where you need to start for the SR&ED to sort of brainstorm what you might have.
Okay. Excellent. And next question is from Oksana. I'd like to understand the difference between a routine NHP, which is natural health product, or cosmetic formulation, and innovative formulation activities that are SR&ED related. If the company is new or a young startup with little to no experience in the field, endeavoring to create a product that doesn't exist on the market, could this be SR&ED eligible?
Yes. It could very well be SR&ED eligible. So the program it's not relevant to whether you're a startup or a long-term company. That's not relevant. It's industry agnostic. You're asking a little bit of a nuanced question, so I'll answer it like this. You may not know how to do it, but someone else does. That's still a SR&ED claim for you, unless you have access to that information or knowledge. So again, going back to breweries, Molson's knows how to do high gravity brewing. They know, they've developed that formula over the years. Another brewery, a smaller brewery, who wants to do high gravity brewing, which is, you've got a 100-liter tank. I'm just going to use numbers, 100-liter tank, and you want to brew 120 liters of beer from a 100-liter tank. How do you do that? So you brew it at a higher alcohol by volume, an ABV percentage, and then dilute it down so it matches your characteristics and gets to your target. And you can brew more beer that way. So Molson's has developed that formula. You may not have as a small brewery. Unless Molson's is willing to share that information with you, you can still conduct a SR&ED project to try to figure that out.
Okay.
So expertise is required. The CRA is not going to pay you to learn how to do something. So if a competent expert in your field, you could hire them and they could solve the problem, then why should the CRA pay you to solve that problem? You could hire someone to do it. It's when the project goes above and beyond your expertise or the available expertise to your company.
Okay.
I know there's a little bit, there's a lot in there, so hopefully that helps.
Here's the lead-in. If the expertise is required and you have to hire it from an outside source in order to be able to meet that, could that consultant potentially be a SR&ED?
Yes. So if the consultant is an expert, you've hired an expert, and they struggle with it. So you hire them to solve the problem for you because you don't have the internal company knowledge. That could be a shred claim. And their invoice costs, you could get about approximately 30% refund on whatever you've paid them.
Like that. Okay, perfect. We've got a couple more minutes left, so let's get in a few more quick questions. I know they're all loaded, so they're not super quick answers, but so from Christopher, so if you invest in a startup company for manufacturing a medical device, does he qualify to claim for SR&ED as an investor?
No, an investment wouldn't be eligible because that's not an expense related to solving a problem. It's an investment. It's a business decision versus a
Okay, a
technological one.
technical.
Now, the company might be encountering shred problems. So if they're getting shred refunds, that's certainly going to make the company more valuable. It'll increase their revenue or at least offset their taxes. So
Okay,
the investment could be better if the company is shred eligible, but the investment itself doesn't. It's a business decision.
okay. No, I know we've got to put up another question, but just on a statement from Jason, he said it sounds similar to tests for patentability. Does does that kind of make a correlation in terms of your thought process
Yes,
as
it,
well?
it
Okay.
can. So if you're applying for a patent, you very likely have shred because a
Mhm.
patent is going to cover new technology of some sort or a new process of some sort. So absolutely, if you're looking at patentability, you should also be looking at shred. It's not a guarantee, but there's a very high correlation.
Correlation. Okay. Um, is not we've already addressed your question. Yes, startups can apply if
Absolutely.
they are qualified in the work that they do.
Just quickly about the startups. So
Mhm.
again, you have to have the eligible projects, but you also have to have eligible expenses. So a lot of startups won't pay, like let's say it's two owners who are starting up. If you're doing all the work internally and you're not paying yourself a salary, you have projects, but you have no expenses. So there's no claim there. One of the things we do is we help, especially smaller companies, establish that threshold. I've got a bunch of charts and things that I can show people where paying yourself a salary so that you can claim a shred refund for your time is significantly better for you than paying yourself dividends and sort of deferring tax to later.
Okay.
It's about a 50% plus swing in the difference. So
Wow. Okay.
there's a line where it's much better for you to pay yourself salary versus dividends.
Defense. All right. That's really interesting. That's a new one for me. So I'm learning today too.
There's a few other things because startups have a lot of cash flow issues. So there's a few other little tactics they can use to manage that and take advantage of shred. We can talk about that again one on
Okay.
one.
And let's get in one more question from Anu. How to time track shred activities, or is there any specific time period for these projects? What time tracking methods will best demonstrate compliance for labor hours spent on experimental design and testing? That's a really great question.
Yes. So, as I said, it does not matter what you provide, the CRA will not like it. That's been my experience. So, the more,
Like dealing with Health Canada. Okay.
yeah. So, the more specific you can be, the better. Again, they're not allowed to tell you specifically what to do. What they want to see is, let's say you're running a test on your line equipment. So we want to test this new process, and we've got 4 people running our line and a manager sort of running a test. So the manager might know that you're testing something new and your production employees don't. When you start that testing, you need to document, we started at 10 a.m. We had a 6-hour shift. Here's all the things that we tested. Here's the people who worked on it and the hours that they worked. So 6-hour shift plus all the time for setup, for teardown, for cleanup, for the manager. One of the things I notice with most people is they underclaim their hours because they don't recognize all the different activities that go into it. So I like to say to people, think about if you were not doing this testing, you'd be doing commercial production. So anything involved with the testing is eligible. You should write that down and claim it.
Okay, perfect. And I know we've just run slightly over an hour, but I do want to touch on Ryan's question just before
Mhm.
we close out. So, does shred for CBD infused bath bombs for specific purposes done through a third party qualify?
Yes,
So,
they can. But
cute.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so right now, because we're not allowed to make specific health claims on anything cannabis related across them. So if someone's trying to prove those claims and they're using a third party lab to test those claims or conduct that research, would that qualify for
It
SR&ED?
can, it can.
Okay.
So, again, so it will depend whether that's experimental development, meaning we're trying to develop a new product or improve a product, versus a scientific claim, which is we're doing research. We have this product. We're trying to do research or advanced science to determine if this does what we think it does. So there's sort of two tracks you can take it on. Just again, we'd have to look at the details, but just saying we have a bath bomb that we think does this, is it SR&ED? What were your obstacles? If you are, you know how to make a bath bomb, and the CBD you're using has these known benefits, and you're figuring out how to marry those elements, and then it does what you think it's supposed to do, that's routine engineering.
Okay.
Again, because you know how to find that answer. If you marry them and it does not meet your requirements, and now you have to do additional work figuring out how to get it to do what you want, meeting that objective, that would be SR&ED. So again, it's always that gap. We're always looking for what prevented you from achieving your goal.
Beautiful. So I have found this a very productive hour and very insightful hour. So thank you very much, Dave. And thank
My
you
pleasure.
everyone for coming. Thank you for all your questions and participating. It makes the time move very quickly and it helps expand everyone's knowledge across the board. So if you do have any additional follow-up questions, want to have a private conversation, um, our email address is up there. You can scan to book a call. I do recommend putting SR&ED or maybe your industry in the subject line, just so we know to get it forwarded as quickly as possible to the correct person to speak to in a more in-depth conversation. I'd really appreciate that, as would our team. But feel free to toss in questions if you're not quite sure who you need to talk to, and we will direct them to the correct people. So once again, thank you very much for joining us, all of our guests, as well as Dave. It's been very, very insightful
Well,
hour,
thank you
and I
very
am
much,
looking
Marie, as
forward.
well. Yeah, this was fantastic, and I didn't even realize we were at an hour. So
Yeah, neither did I. I just looked at it and was like, oh, but I wanted to get that last question in there because
mhm.
they they're all very valuable. So thank you, everyone. We're going to sign off for today, and I do look forward to speaking to everybody come in the future.
Have a great day,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.